everyone, it's Cass. Welcome back to my channel, What Cass Read. Today I am continuing on with my week of wrapping up 2019. So I thought we'd do a really chill video today, and we're going to talk about my 2019 reading stats. I have seen more and more stats videos come up, which is awesome because I'm a fan of stats and I'm a fan of spreadsheets, and I have the graphs from my 2019 reading spreadsheet to share with you all just to see how I did throughout the year. And then at the very end of it, we'll talk about some of my 2020 reading and channel goals. So if you like stats, this is the video for you. Okay, I'm gonna be off to the side here because I'm gonna put stats up there. Like I said, this is a combination of some of my Goodreads stats that I usually take from the end of year things and my personal reading spreadsheet. Of course, let's go to my Goodreads year in review. All right, so the totals for the year. I read 34,034 pages across 73 books. My goal was 36 books. I said it at the beginning of the year. I set it pretty low because I knew I would get there because I was just wanting to keep my reading goals like pretty maintainable this year. The shortest book that I read was The King's Letters, written by Sebastian de Castell. This was an e-book that I downloaded from his website. It's free, available to anyone who also wants to check it out. It's 35 pages. That's totally like an inside fan kind of scoop, and the fact that I even rated it was silly because I did rate it 5 out of 5 stars. It's just totally for the fans of the Greatcoat series, and that's the King's Letters are letters that King Palus wrote whilst he was being overthrown, and these are letters that he meant to distribute to his greatcoats. So it totally made me cry. It was 35 pages long and it made me cry and just got me right in the feels. The longest book that I read was Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, which is 870 pages. I think Harry Potter is going to throw off some of my stats. Like I managed to do a reread of the whole series, but it does tend to throw off like what ends up being my most popular book. I guess longest book. I didn't read anything over 870 pages, so that's nothing to do with Harry Potter's fault. But it does affect the popularity of the books that I read. The average length of pages of the books that I read was 466 pages. Okay, so now let's talk about the popularity, which is what I was just mentioning. So the most popular book that I read was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, with 6,382,410 people also reading that. In second place for the longest time before I did my Harry Potter reread was actually Becoming, written by Michelle Obama. I don't remember how many people had read that book, but that would have won if I had not done my Harry Potter reread. The least popular book that I read was also The King's Letters, written by Sebastian de Castell. 93 people also read this book, but that's, like I said, it's like pretty niche, and you have to download it directly from Sebastian de Castell's website. My average rating for books this year is a 4.0. So I liked a majority of what I was reading throughout the year. And my highest rated book on Goodreads is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, with a 4.85 average rating. Okay, so let's take a look at the books that I read by month. The books that I read by month, you can see that November ended up being a very strong reading month for me. That's wild because I was having a really slumpy fall reading season, and that one just kind of ramped up. And if you look, it was August with 8 books that was previously the best reading month that I had that year. And you'll see September and October dip down until I hit November. August was the NEWT's readathon. So that is how I managed to get to 8 books. May, don't know what happened there. You know what? That was right after the OWL's readathon. Look at April, I got 7 books, and then shoo, down to May with only 1 book. So then the pages will reflect that. So I always find it interesting, like where my page counts end up being. Obviously November was massive with 5,142 pages that I read. But one thing that I thought was kind of cool, September, even though I read only 7 books, I read 3,546 pages, and August, that had 8 books in it, that I read 3,170 pages. So that could also have something to do with the fact that I read 8 and then 7 because I was probably reading a bigger book. Now let's talk about the books, because that was just like my year at a glance. The books, I look at the genre, the publisher, that was a new category that I put in this year, the years that they're published, the format, the condition that they're in. I look at where I got them just to see where I'm spending my money, pretty much. My star ratings, page length, and age group. Okay, so to no one's surprise, fantasy wins for the genre. I read 51 fantasy books out of 73, so that brings it to a whopping 70% of the books that I read. That orange pie that you see is science fiction. I did end up reading 10 science fiction books for a total of 14% of my reading for the year, which makes me happy because I did have a goal to read more science fiction books. Did I hit all of the books that I wanted to read on that science fiction TBR that I created? No, I didn't. I ended up reading the entire Wayfarer series. I read some more young adult science fiction than I had intended. I did get more science fiction in, just not the ones that I had initially thought I was going to get to. The next highest category, surprisingly, is horror. I read 3 horror books, so it goes from 10 to 3. The 3 horror novels, I read Sawkill Girls, written by Claire Legrand. Then I read Needful Things, written by Stephen King, and The Dreadful Tale of Prosper Redding, which is a little middle grade horror. This was the year that I was one of the judges for the BookTube SFF Awards, so you can see that massively reflected in the books that I read for the year. So 22 out of 73 books that I read were from the year 2018, because that was the year that we were judging. So that made up 30% of my reading for the year. The next highest percentage, let's see, is 2017 with 11 total books out of 73 for 15%. I also read 9 books that were published in 2019, which I think was more than I had read the previous year. So like books that were published in the same year that I was reading in, I feel like that's kind of high. That's a pretty good number of books that I was reading that were currently out. So that was 12% of what made up my reading. The formats. This is always interesting to me because the year previously, again, I was like starting to stretch my wings with audiobooks, and this year I found my stride with audiobooks, I believe. The largest category were trade paperback, made up 37% of the books that I read, but then the next highest, just barely it squeaked through, were audiobooks at 21 books out of 73 for 29%. The lowest that I read, I only read 1 mass market paperback that had to have been the Fever series. I didn't read that many mass market paperbacks this year. I actually didn't read any graphic novels, so that was a big whopping 0. Okay, for the condition, I read 61 new books, 6 used books, and 6 borrowed books. So I could definitely do better on that. But I count like every book that I get from Book Outlet to be new, even though I don't pay the new book price. So maybe I need to add a new stat. I don't know, actually. Let's look down at my book source now that we're talking about that. My book source for new books. Okay, so the largest category was 18 books at 25% came from Amazon. So that was me paying brand new. Audible subscription that I have, I read 15 books from Audible. So that came in at 21%, and I counted everything from Audible as a new book. And then Book Outlet, I guess. I did read 7 books from Book Outlet, so that didn't really impact my number of new books all that much. My star ratings, I read a lot of books that I really liked. Or the highest rating that I gave were the 5 stars, with 27 of those books, 37% of my reading. But I also rated 26 books at 4 stars, so that made up 36% of my reading. And then it kind of goes down in scale. So there were very few books that I just didn't really like. I didn't give any books a 1-star rating, and 6 of those books were 2 stars. Okay, the age group, again, no surprise at that. 39 of the books were adult, 21 were young adult, 8 were children's, because I'm considering Harry Potter under the children's category. I think I included His Dark Materials under children's books, and then I read 5 middle grade. My page length, that one was also kind of a shocker to me. I read 21 books that were 400 to 499 pages. And then I also read a lot of books that were 300 to 399. And it was actually more than halfway through the year that I had noticed this stat was really steadily staying around that 400 page mark, and I really wanted to up my numbers for the books that were over 500 pages, which is why I started my book club. I read 27 big books, so that means I read more than the 400 page category, but still I read more shorter books than I did big books overall. My publisher, you can see that's kind of all over the board. So that was a really interesting stat for me to collect this year. Just everything was just all over the place. That giant blue pie, that is my other category, because there was no way that I could list every single publisher, including audiobook publishers and that sort of thing. But it did wind up being one of my more diverse graphs of the year. So about my authors, I look at the author gender, the continent that they come from. Author race is very simplified. I just split it up between white authors and persons of color, authors of color. The nationality, I take the country that they identify that they're from. For the author sexuality, I was really interested to see, and I'm still not entirely sure of that number. It's pretty fluid because it's hard to find identifying information about an author's sexual identity if they don't really put it out there. So that's just based off of what I know from these authors. I didn't read any books in translation. And then I decided to keep track of like how many books per author was I reading, who were my most popular authors of the year. Again, so this one, J.K. Rowling skews my data because, of course, if I'm reading 7 books in one series, she's gonna win. But Sebastian de Castell with 4 books, Robin Hobb with 4 books, Brandon Sanderson with 4 books. So I guess the usual suspects that you'd see me have a lot of books. Who could have been a surprising one that I read a surprising amount? I read 3 V.E. Schwab, 3 Neil Gaiman, 3 from J. Kristoff because I read the whole Nevernight trilogy, 3 from Holly Black because I read the whole Folk of the Air trilogy, 3 from Claire Legrand, that was a pretty surprising one, and 3 from Becky Chambers. So those ones were more all over the board than my 3 usual suspects that you see. I read 45 female authors, so they came in at 62%. The most popular continent was North American authors at 47%. White authors still dominate fantasy, and so that's where you get 62. 43 authors were from the United States, with 16 being the next highest nationality from England. This is just something that I like to keep track of throughout the year. I do already have my 2020 reading stats spreadsheet prepared, and I have finished my first read for 2020, so I've marked that already on the spreadsheet. That felt pretty good to get that going. It's nice to reflect back on the year and just kind of see how I did. Internally, these are all goals of mine to like read more from other genres, to spread out the different formats and where I'm sourcing my books. So this is, the numbers don't lie, and they actually tell you, are you doing a good job at that or not? So some of the goals that I've set for myself for 2020, I've already started on a few of them. So the first one was to read 12 big books. I classify a big book as being a book that's over 500 pages, which is why I started my big ass book club. So the first read that we're gonna do for the new year is Leviathan Wakes, written by James S.A. Corey. Depending on how I do on my TBR, if you haven't seen my brand new Wheel of TBR video, go ahead and check that out. I did put another large book in that TBR as well. So that's, again, something that I know I have a lot of large books on my shelves, and so I want to start chipping away at them because otherwise they're just gonna sit there for a long time. Overall, I did set my reading goal at 50 books, so I did up it from 36. I feel like 50 is a good number to push myself because I was easily hitting 36. 50 books I thought was comfortable. It's when I started getting past and closer to that 70 book range that ended up being more of a challenge for me. So for now, I'm just setting it at 50 and we'll see how that treats me. I also made a whole video on the Goodreads Choice Awards challenge, so if you haven't seen that, go ahead and check that video out. I decided to challenge myself to check out all of the fantasy nominations in the Goodreads Choice Awards to see which one I thought was the actual winner of the best fantasy book that was released in 2019. I went with BookTube SFF judging rules, where if it was within the first 3 books of a series, I will count that. And also to not read a book that's like in a separate series where you needed some previous knowledge from another series. I want to get back into more annotating of books. Annotating is something that I fell off the wagon of this last year, and I want to get back into it for the upcoming year because that really helps me as a book reviewer. With reading as many books as I do and the kinds of details that I feel like should be mentioned in a review, sometimes that can get really, really hard for me to keep track of. And the way that I annotate my books is just one way for me to use as a reference when I'm trying to review a book. So I want to get into more annotating. Okay, and then the very last goal that I want to talk about, this is a channel goal of mine. I hardly ever mention channel numbers, channel analytics, and that sort of thing, but I feel like I want to speak it out into the universe and see if I can make it happen. So as of now, I am just under 5,000 subscribers. So I think I'm at like 4.8K subscribers, and I wanted to hit 5,000. So whenever I hit that, I'm going to be really excited. But my goal for the entire year is to try and hit 7,000 subscribers. I don't know how I'm going to make that happen, but like I said, I just wanted to speak it out into the universe and see how it goes. All right, so that was my reading statistics as well as some of my 2020 reading goals. Let me know what you thought of this video. Like I said, I keep seeing more stats videos pop up, and that makes me really happy as like a stats nerd and seeing how we're doing with our goals. So thumbs up if you like these kinds of videos, because I need to know where my stats nerds are at. And then let me know what you think about my 2020 goals. Go ahead and follow me on my social media if you want. I'm on Instagram and Twitter at whatcassread, the same as this channel. Super easy for you to find. My Goodreads link is always listed down below, and you know how these videos end. I'll talk to you later. Bye.